It started with the hum, that sterile, fluorescent sound that only hospitals know how to make. The kind that drills through your skull and whispers, "You're not supposed to feel safe here." I remember sitting there, staring at the wall behind Dr. Meredith's head. Same beige paint, same tired clock. My checkup had been routine. Blood work, blood pressure, the kind of visit men my age pretend is about health when it's really about guilt. My wife had made the appointment, said I'd been forgetful. I told her it was just stress. I didn't know then that stress had a face, a car, and a silencer. Meredith didn't look up for a long time. Her hand trembled slightly over the keyboard. "You've been involved in the trial longer than most," she said. Her voice tried to sound casual, but I'd been a researcher long enough to recognize the sound of someone biting their own tongue. Then she printed something. A single sheet, folded it once, neat, slid it across the table without meeting my eyes. "Don't go home," she whispered. "Run!" I laughed at first. A nervous, stupid kind of laugh. "Meredith, what is this, a joke?" Her eyes flicked to the security camera in the corner. Then she leaned forward. Her breath smelled like mint and fear. "They're coming for you. You signed something you shouldn't have. She glanced again. "Go out the back, now." My throat tightened. "Who's they?" But she was already on her feet, pretending to search drawers for a file she'd never find. The door handle turned. Two voices outside, low, calm, professional. The kind of calm that gets paid by the hour. Meredith's whisper hit harder than any gunshot. "Please go." I left everything. My coat, my appointment card, even my wallet on the counter. Stepped through the back hall, the one used for deliveries, not escapes. The air smelled of antiseptic and rain. My shoes squeaked against the tile, loud enough to feel hunted. Outside, the parking lot gleamed under drizzle. Every car looked unfamiliar, predatory. I moved fast, head down, like a man pretending not to exist. The note in my pocket felt radioactive. "Don't go home. Run." I didn't run. Not yet. I drove. The kind of drive where your brain's behind you, still sitting in that office asking, "What just happened?" Halfway to the intersection, I saw them. A black sedan, tinted windows, following at a polite distance. The kind of politeness that only killers and debt collectors master. I turned once. Then again. The car followed both times. My hand went for my phone. I called my wife, voicemail. Called again, straight to busy. I switched to the house line. Still nothing. Then the third call, to a colleague at the lab. He answered, breathless. "Jesus, Daniel, where the hell are you?" "What's happening?" Silence. A muffled voice behind him. Then the line died. That's when I saw it. The reflection in the side mirror. Headlights accelerating. I cut into an alley and parked behind a dumpster, engine still running. Rain hammered the windshield like it was angry I hadn't listened sooner. I took out the note again, reading it as if a second look would make it make sense. But all it did was make my hands shake. Meredith's handwriting and looping steady. Too calm for panic. Too deliberate, I turned it over. On the back, in faint pencil, something new. Storage 18, the red file. A chill slid down my spine. Storage 18, our off-site data facility, 20 miles north. My name was still on the access logs, but I hadn't been there in years. The thunder cracked above me, loud enough to wake something inside I'd buried long ago. The instinct that once made me dangerous. I shifted into gear. Half an hour later, the highway stretched empty, the storm chasing me like a rumor. I kept glancing at the glove compartment where I'd stuffed the note. The words pulsed in my head with every mile. I didn't know what I was running from, but I knew what I couldn't run back to: my house, my wife, my daughter. I saw their faces in the blur of headlights, her sleepy smile when she made me tea, my daughter's voice saying, "Night, Dad," from the top of the stairs. Simple, harmless moments that now looked like targets. At mile marker 40, a sudden flash of red and blue filled the mirrors. Sirens. Instinct said, "Stop." Logic said, "Die." I chose logic. Tires screeched as I veered off onto a service road, mud splattering the windshield. The patrol car sped past, oblivious. But I knew better. There are no coincidences in a manhunt. When I finally stopped, I let myself breathe. The air inside the car felt like it had been stolen. I checked my reflection in the rear view. My eyes were bloodshot, older. like they'd just met the truth before the rest of me did. I whispered it out loud because saying it made it real. They're not coming for what I did. They're coming for what I know! Thunder rolled again, closer this time, not from the sky but from the road behind. Headlights, different car, same hunger. I floored the accelerator. The storm didn't chase me this time. I chased it. The road ahead was a sheet of black glass, slick and endless. Lightning tearing the horizon open like an exposed nerve. I drove blind on instinct, each flash showing me just enough to make the next mistake. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number. I let it ring out. Whatever voice waited on the other end already knew where I was going. The only question was whether I'd survive getting there. Storage 18 sat behind the old research complex, fenced off, floodlights humming in the rain. I used to come here for progress reports, back when I still believed in words like progress. Tonight, the gate creaked open like it remembered me. The keypad was dead, but the storm had loosened the hinges, nature's quiet permission. Inside, the air was thick with damp paper and metal fatigue. The hall smelled like mold and secrets. My flashlight jittered across row after row of numbered lockers until it stopped at a faded label, 18. The padlock was new, industrial, ugly. I pulled a crowbar from a maintenance cart and wedged it in. The metal screamed. My breath fogged in the cold, and for a moment, I could almost hear Meredith's voice. "Don't go home! Run!" The lock snapped. The door swung open, heavy as guilt. Inside sat a single red file, just like she wrote. No dust, no cobwebs. Someone had been here recently. I reached for it. The folder was still warm. I opened it. The first page wasn't data. It was a photo. Me standing beside a man in a suit I didn't recognize, shaking hands in front of a banner. Helix Initiative. Cures for tomorrow. I flipped another page. Research summaries, contracts, my own initials. But the words beneath them didn't belong to medicine. They belonged to logistics, distribution, military partnerships. A whole section labeled Deployment Viability. Deployment. My work wasn't curing anything. It was designed to survive. Not patients, not people, but pathogens. They'd used my formula to make something that couldn't die, and I'd signed every form that made it legal. I staggered back, hand to my chest, feeling the world tilt. The hum of the building grew louder, or maybe it was my pulse. I could see it all now. The grant that came too easy, the sudden government liaison, the insistence on security protocols. They hadn't funded me. They'd recruited me, a soft click behind me. I turned. Two silhouettes stood at the door, rain dripping off their coats. One of them held my wallet. "Dr. Hale," the taller one said, calm, precise. "You've been difficult to reach." I didn't answer. The folder hung at my side, bleeding red ink onto my fingers. "We're here for the documents," he continued, "and to escort you somewhere safe." Safe, I repeated, my voice shaking between rage and disbelief. "That what you call it now?" The second man smiled. "Depends on whether you cooperate." Lightning flared again, showing me their faces. Government clean, mercenary cold. I stepped backward toward the metal shelves, mind racing. No weapons, no backup, just rain and fear. But fear's useful when you know how to aim it. "Meredith sent me," I said, watching their eyes flicker. "She said there's more than one copy." That made them hesitate. A heartbeat. That's all I needed. I threw the folder at the taller man. Paper burst like shrapnel. While he flinched, I hit the light switch. Darkness swallowed us whole. The next minute existed in flashes, flashlight beams cutting through dust, boots scuffing metal, the tang of ozone. I ran down the aisle, ducking behind a cabinet. Something crashed behind me, a shelf toppling, boxes spilling. "Dr. Hale!" One of them shouted. "You can't hide. We already have your wife." The words froze me mid-step. My chest clenched. They were bluffing. They had to be. "My wife wasn't even," another voice, closer this time. "She called us before she disappeared. You remember that?" No, she hadn't. The sound of their footsteps came nearer. My mind blurred between past and present, between guilt and instinct. I remembered her voice, the one that used to calm me after late nights at the lab. You're not saving the world, Daniel. You're just keeping it alive long enough to sell it. Maybe she'd known. Maybe she'd tried to warn me before Meredith did. A flashlight beam swept across my face. I ducked, swung the crowbar. Metal met bone. The man went down hard. The other shouted, fired, a deafening crack that shattered glass and memory. The bullet grazed my shoulder. The sting was bright, sobering. I swung again, wild, desperate, until both of them were still. Silence. Only the rain dared to move.
I wondered if Marianne would have laughed last night, or if she'd have looked at Michael the way she used to look at me when I'd said something thoughtless. No, she wouldn't have laughed. She would have noticed. That thought was enough to make my chest ache. Marianne used to say grief was like water in your lungs, and if you stop swimming, it drowns you. I guess I'd stopped swimming, but sitting there breathing in the scent of burned sugar and wax, I felt something sharper rising. It wasn't grief anymore. It was clarity. Cold, simple, and sharp as a shard of glass pressed into the palm. They thought they'd taken something from me, but they'd only shown me where the cracks were, and cracks, if you learn how to listen, tell you how a thing will break. That night I went back to the dining room. The table was cleared. The plates were gone, the laughter erased. Only the faint ring from my glass remained, a ghost mark on the wood. I traced it with my finger, feeling its slickness as though it could still hold the echo of my silence. I imagined their faces frozen mid-laugh, my son's hand on the dog's head, Sarah pretending not to see me flinch. I stood at the head of the table, the chair back in place now, and looked down at it. My chair. It still held the indent from years of dinners, arguments, birthdays, and forgivenesses. That chair had more memory than any of them. It remembered the weight of my body even when they didn't. I didn't sit. Not yet. Instead, I picked up one of the old dinner knives from the sideboard. It wasn't sharp anymore, just dulled metal and history. But its reflection was clear enough to see my face. I looked older than I remembered. There was something in my eyes I didn't recognize at first. Calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm knows exactly where to land. All right, I whispered to no one. You wanted to move me out. Let's see how it feels when I start moving things too. The plan wasn't fully formed, not yet. But the seed was there, small, patient, alive. Revenge doesn't start with rage. It starts with stillness, the kind of stillness that listens. That night I began to listen, to everything. I noticed the way the floor creaked beneath certain steps, the faint hum of the thermostat that always kicked on at 2 a.m., the subtle click of the back door when it wasn't latched all the way. Every sound became a piece of information, every silence an invitation. And as I stood in the dark house, the smell of wax and pine clinging to me, I whispered to the shadows, if they want a ghost, they'll get one. I smiled then, a small, deliberate thing that didn't reach my eyes, because I knew something they didn't. Ghosts don't haunt people. They remind them. The days after Christmas stretched thin and soundless. The kind of silence that hums beneath your skin, as if the world is waiting for you to make a mistake. I didn't leave the house. Didn't answer calls. Not even Michael's when he tried the next day. A hollow apology in his voice, that half-hearted, half-practiced tone sons use when they want to pretend everything's fine. I listened to the voicemail twice, then deleted it. He said, "Dad, I didn't mean it like that." Oh, but he did. He meant it exactly like that. The words had been too perfect, too light, too rehearsed. You don't wound someone that cleanly unless you've thought about it before. Maybe not consciously, Mo, but deep down he'd been preparing to replace me, to push me out of the center until I disappeared completely. The chair was just the announcement. I sat there in the quiet, staring at the spot where Marianne's photograph used to hang. That wall had become my confessional. The faint rectangle of cleaner paint marked the edges of her absence, a ghost frame pale against the fading wallpaper. Sometimes I talked to it, not like a prayer, more like an explanation. I'm not angry, I told her one night. I'm just done being forgotten. Her silence felt heavier than words ever could. That was when I started rearranging. It began small, the kind of changes no one notices at first. A photo frame turned a few inches left. The good silverware moved to a different drawer. Marianne's teacup, the chipped one he threw away, replaced with a near-identical copy from a thrift store, its flaw perfectly mirrored. Each act felt precise, mathematical, controlled. I wasn't destroying anything. I was restoring order. They'd erased me quietly. I was just returning the favor. Each night I'd walk through the house whispering to myself the names of everything that still remembered her touch. The piano key she used to hum over while cleaning. The lamp she turned on first thing in the evening. The candle holder that leaned ever so slightly, because she'd dropped it once and laughed. I put all of it back exactly where she used to keep it. I wasn't trying to haunt them. I was trying to remind them. But reminders have a way of cutting deeper than ghosts. When Michael came by that weekend, he noticed the changes. Subtle things, but his eyes caught on them. I saw the confusion in his expression as he stood in the doorway, holding a store-bought pie, wearing that forced smile people put on when they know they're trespassing. "Did you move some stuff around, Dad?" I smiled, gentle. "Just cleaning up. Your mother liked things neat." He nodded, pretending not to shiver, though the heat was on full blast. His gaze lingered on the photograph, the original one of Marianne, now back at the center of the mantel. Her eyes seemed to follow him as he moved through the room. "You know," I said quietly, "she never liked the dog on the furniture." He laughed, but it broke halfway through. He looked at the chair, my chair, then at me. There was something like guilt in his eyes. Good. Guilt was memory trying to grow back. When he left that evening, the house felt different. Not lighter, heavier, but in the right way, like it had exhaled after holding its breath too long. I stood at the table, touched the back of the chair, and for the first time since Christmas, I sat in it. The wood creaked under my weight, but it didn't protest. It welcomed me back, as if it had been waiting. I ran my hands along the arms, feeling the grooves my fingers had carved over the years. Tiny signatures no one else would ever notice. The house felt alive again, in the quietest, most deliberate way. I closed my eyes and imagined next year's dinner. The laughter dimmer, the dog older, my son hesitating before sitting down, the empty chair waiting, not for him, not for me, for the truth that would hang in the air between us, thick, invisible, permanent. I opened my eyes and whispered to the empty room, "If they want a ghost at their table, I'll give them one they can't forget." And for the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. The sound started small, barely there. A fork scraping against porcelain, the faint clink of a knife nudging the edge of a plate. It shouldn't have meant anything. Just dinner noises, the soundtrack of ordinary family life. But after that night, every sound became a weapon. Each metallic ring was a reminder that I didn't belong at that table anymore. They laughed louder now, Michael especially. His laughter filled the room the way a radio fills silence after static, artificial and rehearsed. Sarah had perfected the art of smiling without looking at me. And Baxter, the dog, the golden heir to my chair, sat between them like a furry punctuation mark, the living symbol of everything I'd lost. I'd watch them from across the table, pretending to butter my bread while cataloging their crimes. Michael's habit of checking his phone when I spoke. Sarah's way of twisting her wedding ring whenever the conversation drifted toward the past, as if the memories might stain her fingers. They thought they were subtle. They thought I was fading. But grief doesn't dull the senses. It hones them. Every sound, every silence, every shift of air became information. They spoke in their new language, one I could almost translate. Plans for the lake house, jokes about coworkers, dreams for the future that no longer included me. My name wasn't spoken, but the space around it was thick with avoidance. I could feel myself becoming invisible, one polite exchange at a time, and yet I smiled, I nodded. I passed the gravy. I let them believe I was still playing my part, because I'd learned something about ghosts. The best ones don't announce themselves. They just linger, quiet and patient, until someone notices the temperature drop. At night, the house changed shape. When they were asleep, I'd move through the rooms like breath through a hollow chest. The air smelled of dust and something faint, her perfume maybe trapped in the wood grain of the old dresser. Marianne's presence lived in traces now. A chipped mug, a forgotten earring, a sweater that still held her warmth. I'd trail my fingers across them like I was tracing the outline of a wound. "They don't remember you," I whispered into the dark. "Not like I do." That sentence became a prayer. Or a curse. Maybe both. I started collecting proof, not just of their neglect, but of my clarity. Little things. A crumpled grocery receipt where Michael had bought that expensive wine she used to love but never mentioned my name on the card. A text left open on his phone. Dad's okay, just quiet. As if quiet meant harmless. The subtle shifts in photographs where my image moved farther and farther toward the edge of the frame. I kept these fragments hidden, folded inside books, slipped between old bills, tucked beneath Marianne's music sheets. They were my case files. Evidence of a slow erasure, and the more I gathered, the calmer I became. Revenge, I was learning, doesn't begin with hatred. It begins with observation. Hatred burns fast. Observation is endless. Sometimes I'd sit in the dark living room, the moonlight carving lines through the curtains, and listen to the ticking of the old clock. It was her clock, the one she wound every night before bed. It had survived everything, time, grief, neglect, and still it kept perfect rhythm. I envied it. I wondered if I could do the same. Keep ticking, unbothered, untouched, but clocks don't forgive, do they? They just keep score. The next evening, Michael invited me to dinner again. Just something casual, he said, casual. That word meant boundaries now. It meant behave yourself. I agreed, of course. I'd become good at agreeing. At the table, the sound returned, that awful polished orchestra of silverware on china. Sarah laughed at something Michael said. Baxter rested his head on Michael's knee, eyes tilted upward like an adoring disciple. The candles flickered against the window, their light bouncing off the glass, and for a split second I saw my reflection sitting across from them, dim and ghostly. Not part of their world, just hovering near it. I looked down at my plate. The food was fine, too fine. Every bite felt like swallowing sawdust and politeness. The room smelled of rosemary and expensive wine, smells that used to mean family but now meant performance. Then Michael said something that froze me in place. You know, Sarah, I think Dad's doing better now. He's moving on. I almost laughed. The words were gentle, well-meaning, but to me they sounded like a eulogy. Like he'd already written the ending to my story and filed it neatly under closure. That's when I realized something crucial. He didn't see me as wounded anymore. He saw me as finished, and that was his mistake. I excused myself from the table, murmured something about needing air. Outside, the night pressed close, heavy with frost. The streetlights hummed faintly, casting long shadows across the porch. I looked back through the window, at them laughing, at Baxter's tail thumping against my chair, and I felt the same cold clarity I'd felt the night he first said it. Dad, this chair isn't for you. He was right, in a way. The chair wasn't mine anymore, but something else was. The silence, the stillness, the space between their laughter where guilt lived. That belonged to me now. I stayed there for a long time, watching the flicker of light inside, my breath fogging the glass. My reflection hovered faintly over theirs, half in, half out. And in that fragile overlap, I whispered to myself, let them laugh. They're only rehearsing. Because the next act was mine, I started counting things after that. Not in the usual way, not steps or breaths or days, but moments of omission. The times they forgot to say my name. The seconds between their laughter and my silence. The distance between the sound of their silverware and the sound of my heartbeat. It was strange how something as small as a dinner fork could make me hate sound itself. The clinking became a kind of torture. Not loud, just sharp. Measured, precise. It reminded me of hospitals, of clocks, of endings. Every meal was another rehearsal for a life where I wasn't needed, so I started watching, closely. The way a detective studies a suspect, eyes soft, voice calm, heart waiting for confession. Michael's tells were obvious once I started cataloging them. He looked down every time he lied, laughed too fast after every half-truth. He thought I didn't notice when he changed the subject the moment Marianne's name came up, or how he'd reach for his phone like a shield. And Sarah. She wasn't cruel, just careful. The way she'd flinch slightly when I walked in. The polite way she'd end every conversation with, you should rest, Dad. Like she was tucking me back onto a shelf. And then there were the photographs. One evening, while they were out, I stood before the mantel. 6 frames, each a monument to revision. In the oldest one, Marianne and I stood beside a much younger Michael, his smile small and uncertain. In the newest, I wasn't there at all. Just him, Sarah, and Baxter. My son's hand rested on the dog's neck the way mine used to rest on his shoulder. My absence had been edited out, gently, seamlessly, like bad lighting. They thought I wouldn't notice. But grief sharpens vision. It teaches you how to see what's been taken. That night, I made a decision, not loud or sudden, but steady. I would start keeping records. Not the kind written in notebooks or typed into phones, no. Mine would be the kind kept in whispers, in habits, in observation. I began with the small things. The empty bottle of wine they forgot to recycle. The old receipt left on the counter. 1 bottle, 2 glasses, a date that didn't match the night they'd said they were home. The silence that followed my questions. Each detail went into the vault behind my ribs, a private archive no one could access. And the more I collected, the calmer I became. Revenge, I discovered, isn't born from a spark. It's grown, like mold on the edge of something once loved. You don't see it at first. You just start tasting bitterness in what used to be sweet. In the dark, I'd wander through the house barefoot, careful not to wake them when they stayed the night. My fingers traced the dust along the furniture, the faint outline where Marianne's vase once sat. Her scent was fading, a mix of lilac and old wood polish. But if I pressed my nose against her old cardigan, it came back to life for a second. That second was enough. They don't remember you, I whispered to her reflection in the hallway mirror. Not like I do. Her silence didn't answer, but it agreed. I could feel it. By morning, I'd grown addicted to the act of noticing. The click of the thermostat, the soft cough Sarah made when she was nervous, the way Michael's voice changed when he spoke to her. Lower, smoother, performative. Every sound became a line of a script I hadn't been given. But I was studying it now. I was memorizing it. At dinner the next week, I tested a theory. I stayed silent completely, not a word. Just the occasional nod, a small smile. They filled the air quickly, overcompensating, their voices loud and cheerful like children singing over thunder. By the end of the meal, Sarah was sweating, Michael fidgeting with his napkin. Silence, I realized, frightened them more than anger. And maybe that was the first real power I'd felt in months. When they left that night, I didn't clean up. I sat in the dark, surrounded by dirty plates and cold food, the smell of roasted garlic clinging to the air. The clock ticked steady and merciless. I tapped the table with my fork, once, twice, 3 times, matching its rhythm. That sound, the one that used to torment me, became something else. A repulse, a promise. I smiled then and whispered to the empty room. You wanted quiet. You'll have it. The next morning I began documenting the silence. Not in writing. I didn't want proof anyone else could find, but in memory, etched deep enough to feel permanent. Every sound became a timestamp. The low hum of the refrigerator at 6:04 a.m. The rattle of the front door as Michael left for work. 19. The faint scrape of Baxter's paws against the kitchen tiles. Always around 7:21. Even their laughter, the kind that used to fill this house, became predictable, patterned. I'd learned their rhythm. And once you know someone's rhythm, you know how to break it. When Sarah came over later that week, she brought coffee, that cheap hazelnut blend she thought I liked. I thanked her, smiled, even offered to make breakfast. She declined, of course. Always in a rush, always with a soft excuse. But before she left, I caught her standing by the photo shelf again, her hand resting on a frame. She adjusted it, just slightly, tilting Marianne's face out of the light. That was when I knew she was part of it. Not cruelly, not intentionally, but passively. Complicit through convenience. She didn't hate me. She just preferred life without me in focus. And that realization was worse than hatred. Hatred at least acknowledges your existence. That night I sat at the table alone again, the silverware neatly arranged for one. The candlelight flickered across the empty chairs, their shadows long and soft, bending toward the walls like ghosts trying to listen. I placed a second plate across from me at Marianne's side and poured a glass of wine for her, the same deep red she always favored. Do you see it? I murmured. How they've changed the story? I could almost hear her, not words, but presence. When the clock struck 10, I took out the box from the cabinet, the one she'd left behind, still faintly smelling of cedar and old paper. Inside were her recipe cards, a few Polaroids, and a bundle of notes tied with ribbon. Her handwriting was so alive it hurt to look at. She'd written once, "Remember, love is a habit, not a promise." Maybe that's why they'd forgotten me. I'd stopped being a habit, so I decided to become one again, just not the kind they wanted. The next morning, I rearranged the photos. Nothing obvious, just subtle corrections. Moved one picture 2 inches to the left, another slightly forward. I placed an old photo of Marianne and me back in the center. I wanted them to feel it, not see it, not yet, but sense it. The quiet disruption, the wrongness. And they did. When Michael visited the next day, he paused at the mantel, frowned. "Did you move these?" I smiled faintly. "No, must have been Sarah." He looked unconvinced, but said nothing. Later that evening, I overheard him whispering to her in the kitchen. Low voices, tense edges. "He's getting worse. Maybe we should—" The rest drowned under the faucet's hiss. They thought I was slipping. That was good. Let them. Confusion was camouflage. Every night after that, I leaned into the role they'd given me, the fading father, the ghost. I'd speak softly, misplace small things, let silence stretch just a little too long. But beneath it all, I was listening, recording, preparing. Because grief, when left alone long enough, ferments into something stronger. And on the night it finally spilled over, it wasn't anger that guided me. It was clarity. Michael and Sarah were hosting another dinner. Not here, of course, but in their new house. They invited me out of obligation. I accepted out of curiosity. When I arrived, everything was too polished. The smell of lemon polish and grilled salmon. New furniture, neutral tones. The dog's bowl placed exactly where my chair used to be. Sarah greeted me with that fixed smile again, polite, rehearsed. "We're so glad you came, Dad." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." But my voice must have sounded different because her smile faltered. All through dinner, the silverware sang its cruel little song again. Each clink like a taunt. I watched their faces in the candlelight, the way Michael's eyes darted anywhere but mine, the way Sarah filled every silence with small talk. Baxter rested under the table, tail flicking against my shoe like a heartbeat. And then when Michael lifted his glass, I leaned forward and said softly, "Do you ever think about her?" He froze. Sarah looked up. "Mom," I continued. "How she used to hum when she cooked. How she'd set the table just so." Silence. Michael cleared his throat. "Yeah, of course, Dad, we do." "No," I said. "You don't." My voice was calm, steady, but I could feel the tremor under it, the ache that had been waiting for air. "You remember your version of her, the one that doesn't include me, the one where she died and everything kept moving, cleaner, easier." Sarah reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. "You erased me," I whispered. "From the photos, from the table, from her." Michael's face went pale. "Dad, no one erased." But I was already standing. I looked down at the table, the shining silverware, the reflections of light dancing across their surfaces like tiny knives. The sound of it all, the laughter, the pretending, the endless polite noise, finally stilled. And in that stillness I felt something like peace. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, and walked out. Outside, the cold hit me clean, sharp as truth. I stood there under the porch light, breathing in the quiet. For the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. They could keep their noise. I had silence, and that at last belonged to me. I opened the old ledger like someone opening a wound on purpose. The cover smelled of cedar and dust, the kind of smell that keeps secrets in its grain. Marianne used to keep it on the sideboard, the place she balanced the checkbook and tucked away coupons and tiny notes about birthdays. I'd taken it after she died because it felt like holding the shape of her hands. Now, under the dim lamp, I began to write. I didn't plan to make a list that night. It happened like a leak you notice only after the room is soaked. Line by line, I wrote the small betrayals down, not as accusations but as coordinates, dates, times, tiny evidence that could be pointed to like a map. December 24th, chair moved to dog. June 3rd, birthday call at 11:58 p.m. Sorry, forgot. March 14th, Marianne's chipped teacup thrown away. August. Correction in front of guests. Actually, Dad. Each entry was short, plain. No flourish, no rhetoric, just facts dressed in the plain clothes of memory. The act of writing steadied me. The pen clicked in my hand the way a metronome finds rhythm. I traced each word like it was a stitch, closing a seam that had been left gaping. I told myself it was for clarity. I told myself I needed proof that my feelings weren't invented by loneliness. I told myself a lot of things to make the ledger dry and sensible, because fury looks ugly on paper. But inside, as the sentences stacked, something colder grew. The list began to read like a pattern, one small erasure after another, all of them polite and ordinary and therefore invisible to everyone but me. That was the cruelty of it. They were erasing me in channels that pass for kindness. Oh, Dad, don't worry about that. It's easier this way. We meant no harm. Those little soft sentences were the blows. I found myself cataloging not just the acts but the manner of them. Michael's casual shrug on the 24th, Sarah's quick laugh when she tossed. The teacup is just trash, the precise tilt of a photo where my shadow receded a fraction further each month. I wrote down the way Marianne's perfume lingered now only in corners, the exact place on the mantel where her frame leaned too far to the left. Writing kept me honest in a way memory sometimes won't be. Memory builds libraries, but handwriting locks a single book on a shelf so you can return to it and not be tempted to rearrange the pages. I slipped receipts between the pages, a grocery from March he'd said was for 2 but had wine for 4, a mechanic's invoice where he'd said he was home that night. Little proofs that fed the ledger like crumbs feed a trail. The ledger became my scaffold, something firm to climb when the floor inside my chest felt like it might fall away. With each line, rage and grief braided into something quieter, a plan not born of heat, but of patience. I began to see patterns as if I'd put on new glasses. Small slights formed routes formed habits. Habits formed a map of omission. The map showed me where to press so the skin would bruise under scrutiny, not open in a way that required police or pity, but bruise in a way that would make them look. They would ask themselves how their life had become so tidy at the expense of a memory. Wouldn't that be the most exact kind of justice? To make them doubt their own convenience, to make them chase a warmth they'd traded for easy rooms and cleaner pictures. Doubt, I learned, eats at certainty. I practiced asking questions that sounded accidental. Do you remember when Mom left the kitchen window open after the rain? A small detail only Marianne and I would share. Or, what did she always hum when she made the stew? Something that should have been a comfort, but, when asked with the right tone, could feel like a test. I rehearsed how to say it. The tilt of my chin, the soft weight at the end of a sentence that suggested melancholy rather than accusation. The mask had to be perfect. Smiles had to be gentle, not wounded. The goal was not to provoke a fight, but to plant a seed of unease. I tried my practiced smile on the living room mirror until my cheek muscles learned the shape. I practiced the small laugh that implies forgiveness without forgetting. I found that the more I practiced, the less my voice shook. Vulnerability is a habit. Calculation is another. I learned to slip from one to the other like changing coats. At night, I'd tuck the ledger back into its place behind a stack of old records, so it would be safe from their hands, and yet close enough that I could retrieve it when planning required it. The entries multiplied, neat columns of hurt and time. I numbered them like a man marking his steps across ice. Each number felt like a commitment. I annotated certain entries with tiny notes. Ask about this at dinner, or leave this where he'll find it. I surprised myself the first time I wrote, leave this where he'll find it. It read on the paper like a threat, but in the quiet of the kitchen it sounded like a test of will. Would I really leave a record in a place meant to be private? Could I trust him to notice and then what? Feel a prickle of remorse and return? Or laugh and fold it deeper into a closet of excuses? The ledger kept my questions. It gave me the illusion of control. Control is dangerous when you've lived long enough to watch the world forget you, because it tempts you into believing you can reorder memory by force of will. I asked myself at that moment if that was the man I wanted to be. the one who plants seeds of doubt in other people's rooms. The ledger answered in ink. There was also a darker, selfish part of me that thought, if I could rewrite how they remember, maybe I could place Marianne back where she belonged. Not to bring her back, of course not, but to keep her presence honest in their lives, not polished away. Was that altruism or vanity? Sometimes the difference is small. Sometimes the difference is what you call it in the ledger. I began shaping scenes in my head, little slices of conversation I could steer at the table, anecdotes that would make them uncomfortable enough to glance at one another, to catch the slack in their smiles. I wrote sample lines at the bottom of the page in a trembling but readable hand. Do you remember the night she? Followed by a blank, then underlined. Pause. The window after dusk and say phrases aloud until the rhythm matched my heartbeat, and not some tremor of grief. You remember the cat she used to feed under the shed? I would whisper until my throat shaped it without choking. I didn't want drama. I wanted precision. Spectacle would invite cleanup and apologies and an easy return to normal. A whispered recall. A tender remark about a recipe or a hum that would be a needle under the skin. You can pick at a needle. You can't pretend it was never there. There was a night when doubt crept back into me. I stared at the ledger and thought maybe I was cruel. That vengeance dressed in civility is just cruelty wearing a tidy shirt. I thought of the way Marianne used to admonish me for being too hard on people. They're trying, Tom, she'd say, her voice soft like thread. That memory pricked something uncomfortable and I almost tore up the pages. I almost threw the ledger into the sink and watched ink dissolve. But then I remembered the way Michael had said it. That thin smirk, and all tenderness fled. The ledger stayed. I made a final note at the bottom of the page that night. No exposé. No accusation. Make them remember. That sentence felt like a vow and also like a promise to myself to stay small and patient and precise. The plan hardened into a single sharp idea. At the next family dinner, I would not confront them. I would instead tell a story so intimate and ordinary, it could pass as a memory, punctuated with details only Marianne and I shared. I would watch their faces when the details didn't match their recollection. I would watch the way their defenses rearranged. The ledger would be my compass. My voice would be the needle. I practiced the story, the exact line where my tone would tip from sweet to searching. I tried it in the mirror and then in the empty house where the walls kept it like a prayer, and the floors answered with faint echoes. My smile was ready, measured, soft, built to bridge grief and accusation without snapping. I tucked the ledger back under the records, smoothed my shirt, and for the first time in months I felt not erased but focused. I knew what to say and how to say it, and that knowledge felt like a kind of armor. The plan was not cruel enough to burn them. It was quiet enough to unsettle them into remembering. That for now would be my justice. The night came like an invitation to something I wasn't supposed to accept, and I answered anyway. I polished my glasses until the rims were clear, smoothed my jacket, tucked the ledger into my inner pocket where it thudded softly against my ribs, a small, patient heart. When Michael and Sarah arrived, they were upbeat in the way people are before they realize a conversation might tilt. Baxter nosed my hand like he owned whatever affection I had left. I patted his head because manners are weapons too. The table looked the same as ever. White cloth, the same salt cellar Marianne favored, candles set in a straight, deliberate line. I sat where I always sat and folded my napkin just so, a habit that felt like prayer. I began with something ordinary. Do you remember the winter Marianne burned the stew and blamed the oven? I said it like a man telling a joke. They laughed easily, the kind of practiced laugh people use to fill silence. But I didn't stop there. I added the detail only she and I would have known. How she spat out 3 grains of pepper onto the counter, and then used them to measure the stew's salt. Because she always said measurements were for people who didn't trust their hands. Michael blinked. Sarah's smile flickered and then smoothed. I watched their faces while I talked, not looking for guilt but for that small crooked recognition. The micro moment when the mind has to decide between a memory and convenience. I told another story. Her humming as she rolled pastry, the exact tune that got stuck in the attic, the way she'd hum softer on rainy days. I spoke slow, deliberately, letting the details hang like bait. When I mentioned the chipped teacup, the one Michael had thrown away because he said it was worthless, I didn't say you threw it away, I said softly. She kept the chipped one because it fit the warmth of her hands. The fork paused halfway to a mouth. Michael's laugh stopped dead. The dog's tail beat on the floor like a frantic metronome. Sarah's fingers tightened on her glass. It was not an accusation. It was a mirror held to a face they hadn't seen closely enough. For a moment, the room shifted. I felt the ledgers outline through my shirt like a pulse answering mine. Their eyes did not meet mine. They scanned the mantel, the photos, the small items I'd been rearranging in the weeks before. I watched a recognition creep over Michael's face. Not full remorse, not yet, but the prick of doubt where certainty used to be. He tried to laugh it off, to call it sentiment, but his voice hit a new, brittle edge. I must have misplaced it, he muttered. Misplaced, a word like a hole. The bravest thing I did that night was keep my tone gentle. The gentleness of a man who's learned the craft of being forgiven without apology. I could have stood and told them everything. The receipts, the moved frames, the nights I'd sat in the dark counting the seconds. I could have thrown the ledger on the table like a confession and watched them scramble. Heard the clink of silverware as they tried to pick up the pieces. Instead, I let them look. I let their own minds do the work of remembering or not. That was my cruelty and my mercy wrapped together. When dessert came, I spoke of a small kindness Marianne used to do, putting a dab of jam on the corner of the children's napkins so they'd get the first bright taste. She did that even when she was tired, I said. She wanted the first taste of sweetness kept for them. Michael's jaw moved. He searched his face for the boy who used to reach with sticky fingers and found instead the man who had traded memories for convenience. I felt no triumph like fireworks. What I felt was a quiet tightening. The exact kind that follows a needle under the skin. It would ache. They would pick at it. That's what I'd intended. After they left, the house closed around me differently. The candlelight threw new shadows, and the photographs looked like people reconsidering their stories. I took the ledger out and smoothed my palm over the page where I had written the chipped teacup entry. Ink rubbed slightly under my touch, and for a second I imagined wiping the whole thing clean, letting mercies win. But mercy had already been spent on patience and politeness. What I'd done wasn't retribution as much as reclamation. I reminded them that memory is a shared thing that needs tending, not a room to be redecorated. I'm not proud of the way I turned kindness into a question. I tell you that because you should know I am not a cartoon villain. I am someone who learned to measure wrongs and use small truths like levers. The ledger slid back into my pocket and felt lighter than it had in months. The chair felt heavier in a good way when I sat down. It bore the imprint of years. It had stories in its grain. For the first time since that first Christmas when my son moved it toward Baxter, I felt seen. Not by them offering comfort, but by the fact that their certainty had been unsettled. Remembering is messy and slow and often cowardly, but tonight they had to remember in real time, and that sting might be the beginning of something like repair. Or it might not. I can live with either outcome. I can live with my ledger and my quiet measures because they are mine, and because they return Marianne to the center of the room, even if only as a matter of conscience. I turned off the light and stood a while longer in the dark. The house exhaled around me, not quite forgiving, not quite closing the wound. In the silence, I felt both less alone and lonelier than I had in months, the precise, complicated space where justice and sorrow meet. I placed my hand on the back of the chair and felt the old grooves under my palm, the small marks only time remembers. The list had worked its small miracles. It had not destroyed them. It had made them look. That, for now, was enough. The first snowfall came early that year, like the universe wanted to apologize for something. I remember standing by the window watching flakes drift down in slow motion, melting against the glass. They looked like ghosts trying to get in. The house was warm, almost too warm. I'd been cooking since morning. Cinnamon, rosemary, butter, cloves. The kind of smells that used to pull laughter into every room. Now they just filled the silence. I'd written the invitations myself. No texts, no calls. Just handwritten notes slipped under their door. Dinner, Christmas Eve, come home. I didn't sign it, but they'd know. Guilt has its own handwriting. By 6, everything was ready. The roast sat beneath a glaze of honey and thyme. The table gleamed under the old chandelier, her chandelier. Every plate aligned perfectly, every knife angled the way she liked it. And at the head of the table, the chair. My chair, no, her chair. I'd set it this time carefully, lovingly, a folded napkin. A glass of wine. Her place restored. They arrived at 7. I heard the tires crunching in the snow before I saw their shadows stretch across the porch. My son's voice was the first to pierce the quiet, soft and uncertain. Dad? He didn't call me father anymore. That word carried weight. Dad was easier to drop. His wife followed, smiling too brightly, clutching a bottle of wine like an offering to a god she didn't believe in. The dog limped behind them. Slower now, older. His golden coat dulled around the muzzle. He hesitated at the door, nose twitching, tail still. Animals remember things people choose to forget. I greeted them like nothing had ever fractured between us. I told them how good it was to see them, how much I'd missed the sound of their laughter. Lies dressed up as warmth. My son's eyes scanned the room, searching maybe for signs of danger. Or ghosts. We sat. The clinking began again. That unbearable sound of silver on porcelain like tiny hammers against my skull. I smiled through it, nodding, asking about work, about the house, about them. But every answer felt practiced. Their words skimmed the surface, never daring to touch anything real. And then something strange happened. The dog didn't sit under the table this time. He stayed beside my son, whining softly, staring at the empty chair across from me. The one with the folded napkin and the untouched wine. My wife's chair, I saw my son notice it. His eyes flickered just for a second, like a match struggling to catch. He cleared his throat, reached for his drink, and said, "Dad, you didn't have to go to all this trouble." I tilted my head, smiled faintly. "It's not trouble," I said. "It's tradition." The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. He nodded but didn't speak again. The silence pressed between us like a wall. I watched him eat. The way he avoided looking at her chair, the way his fork scraped the plate too hard, the way his wife's hand trembled when she lifted her glass. I knew then that they remembered. Maybe not the details. Not the last Christmas when she was alive, not the way her laughter filled this room. But the guilt. Oh yes, that they remembered. As the meal went on, I began to talk. Stories at first. Little ones. The time she burned the turkey and cried. The way she'd hum while setting the table. The silly fights we'd have over the lights being too bright. My voice was soft, measured. A kind of music meant to disarm. But then, slowly, I let the edges show. I mentioned how she used to say that family meant never leaving anyone behind. How she'd look at our son and smile, like she already knew he'd forget. I didn't say it with anger. I said it like truth, like confession, like a prayer she'd once whispered to me. The dog whined again. My son's hand froze midair. His wife glanced between us, unsure whether to speak or breathe, and then I stood. My chair creaked under the shift of my weight, and the room seemed to shrink. I raised my glass. To her, I said. My voice didn't tremble. The glass felt cold in my hand, colder than it should have been. My reflection trembled inside it, a distorted silhouette framed by candlelight. To her, I repeated softly, and for a moment I almost couldn't hear my own voice. The air had thickened. Every flame leaned toward me as if the house itself were listening. My son didn't raise his glass right away. His wife did, out of politeness, maybe fear. The dog whimpered, claws clicking faintly against the tile, a soft rhythm beneath the silence. And finally he lifted his drink, eyes locked on mine. "To Mom," he said, but his voice cracked halfway through it. I smiled. Not cruelly, not yet, just enough to let him see I'd noticed. We drank, and for a brief instant the warmth of the wine spread through me like a memory trying to come back to life. I could almost feel her beside me, her laughter low, her hand brushing mine under the table. I could almost believe we were still us, but then I looked at him, at them, and the illusion shattered. I reached beneath the table, slow and deliberate, my fingers grazing the edges of the frame I'd hidden there. When I placed it on the table, the silver caught the candlelight and sent it flashing across their faces. My wife's photograph. The real one. The one he'd replaced with that washed-out copy in the hallway. The original was brighter, her eyes clearer, her smile untouched by the dull gray of time. I set it down exactly where the dog's bowl had been the year before. "This chair," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "was always hers." The room went still, not a breath, not a sound. The kind of silence that feels alive, like it's waiting for someone to break it. My son's face drained of color. His wife looked between us, panic flickering behind her smile. The dog's tail stopped moving. She used to sit here, I continued, still gentle. She'd light the candles, hum that silly song she loved, and say grace before anyone lifted a fork. Do you remember that? He didn't answer. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, studying him the way a scientist might study a specimen under glass. No, you don't remember? Strange. I remember everything. His wife tried to speak. Some apology, some meaningless noise, but I raised a hand and she went silent. She loved this room, I said. The smell of pine, the sound of laughter, the way the light would catch in her hair when she turned toward the window. She loved you most of all. I paused, letting the words hang there, letting them ache. She worried about you, you know. Thought you'd lose yourself chasing all the wrong things. He finally looked up. His eyes were wet, but not from sadness, went from shame. Good. Shame was the first crack in the armor. I didn't mean, he started, but I cut him off with a soft chuckle. You never do. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the slow drip of wax down the candles. It pooled around their bases, thick and red as blood. I stood again, circling the table, the photograph still between us. You replaced her picture, I said. You moved it. You pushed her to the hallway, like she was something to step around. She was fading, he said suddenly, almost pleading. We thought, don't tell me what you thought. My voice cracked, sharp now. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought you could make her disappear. You thought that chair could become a dog bed and I'd smile through it. He stared at me, speechless. Then I smiled, slow, deliberate, and placed my hand on his shoulder. It's all right, I said softly. I just wanted to remind you. I could feel him trembling under my touch. It wasn't fear of me, not exactly. It was fear of the truth sitting between us. Fear of what it meant to have forgotten someone who loved you more than life itself. His wife looked like she wanted to stand, to leave, but she didn't. No one moved. We were frozen in that perfect, terrible moment. A family tableau framed in guilt and candlelight. Finally, I sat back down, folding my napkin carefully across my lap, as though nothing had happened. The normalcy of it unnerved them more than any anger could have. I resumed eating, each bite deliberate, measured. The food had gone cold, but I didn't mind. Cold things last longer. When I finally looked up again, he was still staring at the photograph. Next year, I said quietly, we'll do it again. Same table, same chair, same place for her. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I lifted my glass one last time, my reflection fractured by the wine's surface. To family, I said. No one echoed me this time. The candles flickered once, then steadied. The dog lay down sighing like something old and tired. My son kept staring at that photograph, at her, and I could see it happening behind his eyes. The cracks forming, the shame tightening around his throat. And in that silence, in that small, perfect silence, I felt it, not triumph, not peace, something colder, something cleaner, vindication. The days after that night stretched like winter shadows, long, thin, and cold. I could hear the quiet breathing of the house again. No laughter, no footsteps. Just the slow ticking of the clock in the hallway and the faint hum of the refrigerator that had outlived everyone's appetite. It was the silence I'd been craving. And yet, it didn't sound the way I thought victory should. For a week I waited for the phone to ring. It didn't. No calls, no messages. Not even a half-hearted Merry Christmas forwarded out of guilt. The silence grew roots in the walls, and I found myself listening for it. That absence of sound, as though it were music written just for me. Sometimes I'd sit at the table again. Same candles, same silverware, her photograph still at the center, though the glass had smudged with my fingerprints. I'd light one candle instead of 5, and I'd eat slowly, the way she used to when she was trying to save her time. The chair stayed empty. That was important. A symbol, maybe, or a grave. I'd catch myself tracing the edges of the wood, the faint grooves she'd left from years of tapping her ring against it while she thought. My thumb would fit perfectly into one of those indentations, and I'd imagine her hand there, her warmth, her laugh. Then I'd remember how quickly they'd let it all fade. That's what hurt the most. Not the chair, not the laughter, not even the dog's tail wagging where her memory used to sit. It was how easily they forgot. I told myself I'd done what was necessary, I'd restored order, meaning I'd forced them to remember, if not her, then at least what they'd done to her absence. But sometimes, late at night, when the heater clicked and groaned like an old throat clearing itself, I'd feel it, and that sliver of doubt, was I right? It's strange how those words come to you when you think you've already won. You can crush someone's pride, twist their guilt into a mirror, make them see everything they tried to bury. And still, the question lingers like smoke. Was I right? I'd laugh sometimes out loud just to hear a human voice again. It always startled me, and how rough, how tired it sounded. I'd forgotten how long it had been since I'd heard laughter that didn't feel borrowed. The chair watched me. It always does. One night I poured myself a drink, her favorite, the sweet one she used to make on cold evenings when the lights outside the house blinked like stars trying too hard. I raised the glass toward her photograph. "We did it," I whispered, and for a moment I could swear she smiled back. But then came the dreams, the dog barking, not distant but close. Its claws scraping the floorboards. That same low growl it used to make when someone approached the chair. I'd wake in a sweat, convinced I'd hear it right outside the door, waiting. Sometimes I'd even call out softly into the dark. "Quiet," I'd whisper. "It's over now." But the silence afterward felt heavier than the sound. In the daylight, I'd convince myself it was nothing, just guilt's ghost pacing around the edges of my peace. That's the thing about revenge. You think it frees you, but it just changes the shape of the cage. Still, I'd rather be the ghost who haunts than the one who's forgotten. So I stayed here, in the house that smelled of old wood and dying candles, in the room where love once laughed and memory now whispered. I moved through it freely, like a spirit unchained from mercy. Because yes, it was quiet now. Beautifully quiet, and that quiet, it belonged to me. Morning light crawls slow across the table these days. It takes its time, stretching over the wood grain, spilling over her photograph like it's afraid to wake her. I sit in the same spot every morning, the one across from the empty chair. The ritual matters. Rituals always matter when memory is the only company left. I pour the coffee. 2 cups, always 2. I still can't bring myself to stop doing that. Old habits are loyal, sometimes more loyal than people. I let the second cup cool untouched, until the steam fades into nothing. Then I drink mine, bitter and black, and I tell myself that silence is the taste of victory. But it isn't victory. Not really. It's something smaller, quieter, like revenge stripped of its purpose once the curtain falls. I started to notice how still the house had become. The refrigerator's hum had a rhythm now, like breathing. The pipes sighed when the water ran. The walls creaked when the wind pressed against them. Every sound felt alive, as if the house itself was remembering along with me. Sometimes I'd walk the hallway at night, the same path she used to take when she couldn't sleep. I'd stop where her slippers used to be, kneel, press my hand to the floorboards. Cold, always cold. It's funny, isn't it? You spend your life surrounded by people, and yet the quiet is what teaches you who you really are. One night I found myself standing by the window, staring out at the snow. The street was empty, no footprints, no tire tracks, just white stillness stretching into nothing. That's when I realized it. This was the same view she loved. She used to say snow was proof that the world could still start over. Even if it's just for a night, she'd whisper. Everything gets covered. Everything looks clean again, but snow doesn't stay clean, does it? It melts, it leaves mud. It remembers the mess underneath. I laughed at that thought. Quietly at first, then harder until I had to grip the windowsill to steady myself. That's when I saw it. A shadow. Small. Moving. Just beyond the fence. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it, but then it barked. Once. Short. Familiar. I froze. The dog. It couldn't be. Not after all this time. Not here, but the bark came again, sharper this time. My heart stuttered in my chest. I opened the door, stepped outside, barefoot in the snow. The cold burned against my skin, but I didn't care. Go on, I whispered into the wind. Show yourself nothing, just the night breathing. The air heavy with something unspoken. And then I saw it. Paw prints in the snow. Fresh ones, leading toward the woods at the edge of the property. For a second, I almost followed. But then I stopped. No, let it go. Let him go. I turned back to the house, shivering. When I closed the door, the quiet felt different. Less like peace, more like waiting. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak sounded like a whisper. Every flicker of the candle felt like an accusation. I sat in the empty chair, Her chair, just to feel close to her again. I told myself it wasn't wrong, that I'd earned this place, this silence, this solitude. But her photograph seemed to watch me. The way she smiled, soft, forgiving, it made the room feel smaller. "Don't look at me like that," I muttered. Still, she did. So I turned the frame face down. The candle burned lower. My reflection wavered in the glass of the window, and for the first time I didn't recognize it. The man staring back, he looked empty, like someone who'd mistaken vengeance for love. I wanted to tell her I was sorry, but I didn't know which part to apologize for, the forgetting or the remembering. Eventually I stood, picked up her picture, and placed it back at the center of the table. Upright again, watching. "I just didn't want them to erase you," I said softly. "That's all." The house didn't answer. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, endless, covering everything. In the dim glow of the last candle, I lifted my glass one final time. The words came out a whisper, almost to myself. "To her," I said, "always her." And somewhere deep in the silence that followed, I thought I heard the faint clink of another glass, an echo, a memory, as if she'd raised hers too. The quiet wrapped around me, warm and final. Maybe revenge isn't justice. Maybe it's just another way of keeping love alive when the world tries to bury it. Either way, the chair was mine again. And for the first time, that felt like enough.